Matthew Libatique burst onto the scene as the DP behind Darren Aronofsky's breakthrough film Pi, and that collaboration has been followed through with Requiem for a Dream, The Fountain, and Black Swan. He's also shot Iron Man, Iron Man 2, and Cowboys and Aliens for director Jon Favreau, She Hate Me, Inside Man, and Miracle at St. Anna for Spike Lee, and Tigerland and Phone Booth for Joel Schumacher. In this archived interview from 2008, Mr. Libatique discusses his work on Spike Lee's Miracle at St. Anna and the wealth of terrific work that came before it. What are your earliest memories of films? Do you remember the first one that really struck you?
You know, I mean, the first films that struck me weren't anything that influenced me to being a filmmaker, really. I mean, I think, I'll be honest, Star Wars is the first film that really takes me away. Mm-hmm. And I remember the lines, lining up wherever I was. I just, in 77, 78?
Right, yeah. 77,
People lining up, around blocks to see a movie, and I still haven't seen that. I mean, you see that. I guess there's just more theaters, but back then, you'd go to a place that'd be the single theater, and there'd be a line going around the block.
Yeah,
and,
I never saw anything like
that for something to watch. It's like watching, to watch a screen, ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That sort of took my, that was a memory I've always held with me, but, it never influenced me to be a filmmaker. That seems so far away. Mm-hmm. The idea of being a filmmaker seemed so far away for me that it wasn't until I saw Do the Right Thing that I realized that it could be a possibility.
Okay.
What was it about that film that spoke to you?
It was a film that had, at the time I think I was 19, 20 years old.
Yeah.
And it just had an energy to it, and it spoke to a generation. And it also made me feel, because at the time, you heard stories of Spike Lee. Spike Lee was a young, at the time maybe he was 30 years old or late 20s when he made the film. Definitely in his 20s when he made She's Gotta Have It. It all of a sudden it seemed, that people don't have to be in their 40s. The images of Billy Wilder and Steven Spielberg. Even Steven Spielberg was young when he was making his films, but at the time I didn't know that. And for me, for a young minority to be able to make it in America and have the opportunity to become a filmmaker, that just was out of this world for me.
Wow. Yeah.
So that definitely pushed me towards today.
And what a dream come true that you've now collaborated with him.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. In the year, I think it was 2003 or 4, I had done a film with. I had come off of a disappointing year because The Fountain was shut down, and I didn't have a film. I had met on a couple things that I didn't get, and then I get a call one day from Ernest Dickerson, who obviously is a hero of mine. He wants to do this little $2 million film called Never Die Alone, and of course I jumped at the chance to work with him. That same year, later, I get a call from my agent, and said, "Guess who called?" And I said, "David Lynch." and that was just sort of my party answer every time somebody says, "Guess who called?" But she said, "Spike Lee." I said, "You're kidding." And I thought automatically that was an Ernest Dickerson connection, but it wasn't. He just sort of called randomly, for me to look at She Hate Me as something that we could do together. And I met him at the Mondrian in Los Angeles and hit it off. And I just, it took me a while to get past the fact that he was a hero. And I kept telling myself over and over again, I have to deal with this from a peer-to-peer standpoint, not necessarily.
Yeah, right.
A fan standpoint. Although, I kept, I just loved everything that, just from a pop culture standpoint,
right,
that Spike meant to my generation, our time. So, it was a no-brainer. I said the thing would have to really suck for me not to say yes. So,
absolutely, and
reading it.
We're so crazy about his films here. And for one reason, all of them are so, they're daring in all aspects, but particularly the visual aspect. I mean, he really isn't afraid to take risks with his visuals and really think outside of the box. And I know that Ernest was his frequent collaborator early on in his career, and obviously he was an idol for you. What other, as you began to study cinematography, what other cinematographers really stood out for you? What are your favorite films, your favorite sequences from some of their work?
Automatically, I call them cinematography classics. I mean, things like I'm talking about post-'60s, most of these '70s films, and Gordon Willis, his work with Woody Allen in Manhattan, and Francis Ford Coppola as well, and his work with Alan Pakula, Parallax View were just, they're just amazing works. And if you look at those, what's interesting to me is a lot of those films were before he had the initials ASC at the end of his name. So there's something to be said for it's like an early rock star. It's the early days of just skyrocketing towards where you're meant to be. And I think that the early '70s, Gordon Willis was just a complete and utter master at the top of his game. Storaro as well. I mean, at the same time, I sort of became conscious because of Lee and Dickerson that there was this sort of cinematographer-director collaboration, and of course I automatically went to Bertolucci and Storaro. Tango of Paris, which is, if you took it in still frames, that film is, textbook.
You are completely talking my language. You are mentioning films that I am insanely crazy about.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and then you look at, obviously The Conformist. The Conformist is the first film. I mean, literally that year I saw Do the Right Thing and The Conformist in the same year for the first time. Obviously, Do the Right Thing being a new film, and I thought to myself, those are only two films I really needed to see. Everything else paled in comparison that year for me, just as a young person and a person who was sort of striving and getting the idea for the first time to become a filmmaker. How could you not be motivated to buy a Bell & Howell crank-up camera?
Wow. You mentioned earlier David Lynch, and for me, I mean, and we talk about this a lot. For me, it's David Lynch and Michael Mann are among two of the most atmospheric directors that we have. Is David Lynch on your radar? Is that a director that you would really want to work with?
Oh, absolutely. I think that I'm attracted to filmmakers. If Spike Lee being one, Darren Aronofsky being another, who challenge the art form of cinema. I mean, of filmmaking. They don't limit themselves, and they maximize every single. They maximize everything that the craft has to offer, because there's so many different disciplines involved in creating one craft, and I think David Lynch is one of those as well. And just his use of darkness and atmosphere, and the other thing I appreciate, and if you look at all the people I worked with, and if I listed everybody I appreciated, it's really about creating an atmosphere through all aspects of the art.
Yeah.
And David Lynch, he may be the most atmospheric director that we have in America. I think he is, actually.
Yeah, without a doubt. And Gordon Willis, he's always known for not being afraid to shroud his subjects and his shots in darkness. He's Godfather 2 is like a prime example of that. It's really daring stuff.
Yeah. Well, he's also, there's another person. They're not taking the craft in its literal sense. He's creating a language out of light and shadow, and he's building an arc to what he's doing. If you look at Godfather, and this was textbook, and everybody talks about how dark Marlon Brando's eyes were in that film. They would open up when they needed to open up. When you're allowed to see into the man's psyche, that's when he would let you see his eyes. And when the audience was meant to be hidden, or when he was hiding from the audience and from the people around him, that's what he was doing. It's complete. It was utterly, and that's creating the atmosphere, and it's just it's being at the top of your game and understanding your craft, and being with Gordon and the great cinematographers even today. My contemporaries, Christopher Doyle and Harris Savides.
I love Doyle.
Javier Aguirre. These guys are all. The fundamentals are just. It's like breathing. It's really about the choices you make as an artist and a craftsman.
Yeah, and we spoke of this with Mr. Blanchard too. It really is all of these creative positions on a film crew. They really are all assistant storytellers, and you just said it. Your job is to tell the story with lights and shadow. I know you went to. Did you go to the American Film Institute? Did I read that correctly?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. What did you take from your schooling there?
That's interesting. AFI was 99% about storytelling, and it was really what I got out of the school. Really was the things that they used to preach were the sense of collaboration and the responsibility of collaboration and the responsibility of every discipline to be storytellers. I mean, they had designers, editors, screenwriters, producers, directors, obviously, and cinematographers, and every discipline. That's what they would teach. That's the theme. That's if there was one thing that was written underneath the front doors of the school, it'd be collaboration in the craft of storytelling. And I would obviously, being a cinematographer and a young one at that, and somebody who was still learning, being in school, what's the best shot? What's the best composition? What's the best composition in terms of angles and graphic, and what's the best composition in terms of light and shadow? And my collaboration, funny, in my first year at AFI, I met Darren Aronofsky, and we used to have arguments about those things, like what was the priority of what we were doing. And I guess because maybe we were at the same age and we were similar, we liked the same subject matter, we were able to sort of argue and learn from each other. And I learned a lot from Darren, actually. I mean, and I'm sure he learned a lot from the school. But it was like my collaboration with him afforded me the opportunity to almost learn from the directing classes as well as the cinematography classes, because I became a storyteller more than a cinematographer. Mm-hmm. Although my love as a craftsman is cinematography, my responsibility as a filmmaker is what became more important. And I like to think that has taken me to where I am today in terms of being a filmmaker. Well,
your frequent collaborators, Spike Lee, Darren Aronofsky, Joel Schumacher, I mean, they really strike me as directors that will let you go and give you freedom to experiment. Do I have that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that, but they're all different. I mean, Joel is a person that sort of sets up a large canvas with very little rule. Rules, I should say. Obviously he's a leader by what he doesn't like, and he's extremely daring with his with visuals and choices he makes and design. Spike is more controlling. He has a command of the story he's trying to tell, but he is equally as daring. And the thing about Spike is he's extremely daring with his camera placement. He's fond of multiple cameras, and he's fond of and it's really within this structure, Matty, what can you do?
Right.
And that's the challenge with working with Spike. With Darren, it's the opposite way. It's really, these are the frames, like this frame, and add texturally and atmospherically to the film, with a complete and utter understanding of what the arc of this film will be. I mean, his goal is for a unified collective to make one film, as is most people's, but Darren is extremely specific. Extremely specific. So, if a character is moving, like in The Fountain, for example, Tomas, Tom, and Tommy are all moving towards this bright light. Well, the film starts in darkness for all three of them. It's going to end in brightness for all three of them. And that's something that's conceptually ingrained in Darren's master plan. Not just mine. It's not me, but it's a collective that invented it. So, I enjoy both. Having to create those concepts, and I also enjoy having to execute them.
Absolutely. Do you find, though, that, I'm sure that you do, when you work with someone as frequently as you have these three filmmakers, you develop a shorthand with them that you instinctively know what they will respond to and what they won't?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, familiarity is everything. I mean, it helps get past all the, the other thing is building a relationship with the filmmaker, with the directors, is going to do that. So if I'm working with, these three particular filmmakers, obviously there's going to be a shorthand, and they sort of know how I work, and it makes it a lot easier. And then I think that ultimately you have more freedom to be creative, because you're not walking softly, and you're not being tentative. When I'm working with in a first time situation with somebody, then it's really about becoming socially compatible with the person, because I think that it's important for you to like the person that you're working with, especially somebody who as closely as a director. For me, I just need to be able to know I can call them without having to schedule an appointment.
Right.
Yeah. There's so many reasons why I love Spike's movies. One of the reasons is because they're all so different. I mean, he's such a versatile director, as you are a cinematographer. Tell me what was different and challenging for you about Miracle at St. Anna.
That's a good question. Well, it's always, I guess speaking on creative terms, it's how do you articulate something that it would be, a World War II film? We've seen plenty of those. Battle scenes, seen plenty of those. And how do you, my first worry was how I was going to articulate those things in a different way. But then I slowly realized I didn't have to, because the content was going to take care of itself.
Right.
I just had to do what was right for the film with what the tools I had. And sometimes it takes a while for me to realize those things. I mean, I realized the same thing on Iron Man, that it isn't really about being so boisterous with the cinematography. It's about serving the content. And sometimes that's going to be enough if you do it well. And with Miracle, honestly, it was sort of, there were a few things that were handed to me as they were already part of the structure of the film. 16 millimeter, for example, was part of the structure of the film. We're shooting 16. Why? Because of money, and that's fine. I'm just glad they didn't put a DV camera in my hands.
At St. Anna? On St. Anna, you shot 16?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
All of the 1944 portion was 16 millimeter, which is about 85% of the film. And then we decided to say, how do we, Spike likes to put big bookmarks in his films, and I think, and chapter headings. So we basically shot everything that would be our present day, which is in this film 1981. Shot that in 35 millimeter just to have the contrast. But the biggest challenge really was how are we going to paint this movie? How are we going to make this look? How are we going to cover this, and how are we going to make it impactful, an experience for the viewer? And luckily, this, between locations that we had and the staging we had and the actors that we had, we were able to, a lot of it took care of itself, to be quite honest with you. And it was just about knowing, we had a lot of scenes with multiple actors. So we've had very few scenes where I had two actors sitting at a table. I had very few scenes where I had less than 4 people.
That's a special challenge, isn't it?
It is, because you end up getting into situations of coverage, if that's the case. And situations of coverage are, they're tedious. So to make the film work and move along, just from a execution standpoint, you don't want to get mired in coverage. That's the beauty of Spike Lee. Spike Lee will make a choice. I mean, he'll do an 8-minute scene in a single shot, and just that will be his choice, and nobody will tell him any different, which is refreshing. Yeah. I think that it adds, and if you look at his films, if you really study his films, you can see the choices he's made with the limited shot counts. And I think it comes from him being sort of a guerrilla filmmaker. He always likes to harken back to the days where he used to run around New York with a smaller camera and used to shoot films. I always look back at Pi in the same light. There's a way to do it simpler. And there's a way to do it with less setups. And our challenge being there's so many actors in every frame, our references, every reference I pulled were films that would have a number of people in them. And I would do still frames on the computer, and I'd create sort of these iPhoto books of references of just composition. It wasn't even anything about lighting. It's just composition. Can we get away with just a good performance, being more tableau about it? not to say we didn't use a lot of coverage, because we did, we shot 2 and 3 cameras all the time.
Right.
But we would do group shots, and I think I'm very proud of the fact that the film, because of the strength of the performances and the choice in composition, exists mostly in group shots. So that's exciting to me.
Yeah, you've worked on the lowest budget films, everything from Pi to Iron Man, which is as a big budget studio as you can get. Tell me the difference. Is there different chemistry at work there when you have to work faster as opposed to taking your time with setups for bigger budget films?
Wow, there's definitely a difference. There's a lot more guys sitting around. Let me say, there's a lot more guys sitting around and there's a lot more trucks.
Right.
From a filmmaking standpoint, I'm lucky. I'm very fortunate. I'm doing what I like to do, and as a cinematographer, you're by the camera, and you're in charge of that setup, and you're moving it in execution. You're quarterbacking this thing through, and for me, it's hard. I'm focused on that core of my existence when it comes to being a filmmaker. So the other things, the peripherals, seem kind of frivolous in the end. When I look back on Iron Man and see how many people used to sit around, and all having a job and responsibility, don't get me wrong, but because of the sheer size, there'd be more people. And then when I was at the core of what I was doing, there would be a lot of guys waiting around for me to be done.
Sure.
Whereas Pi, everybody had 3 or 4 jobs, so nobody is ever still. Yeah. And if you are, you're not doing anybody any good. Really, the funny thing about Pi, the really funny thing is there was a couple people who had to get paid, and nobody got paid in that film. The laziest people on the shoot were the people who got money. Why is that?
That happens.
Isn't that the way?
Why is that? But ultimately, it's the same job for me because I try to not complicate what I'm doing with worrying about everything else. I mean, did I have a better crew? Yes. That's the benefit of working on a bigger budget film. You just have a fantastic technical support where you're not carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders on an independent film like Pi, which is the most extreme of examples. I think Requiem might be a better example, or Saturn. I don't know if anybody ever saw that, but that also being a very small film where you carry a lot of the weight of the film on your shoulders, but you had at least competent if not exceptional, maybe 1 or 2 people on your crew that were really doing the job. On Iron Man, you're going to have just an army of people, an army.
That's true.
And Inside Man as well. I mean, the 2 biggest films I've ever done were Iron Man and Inside Man. So,
you're waiting for the next Man script.
The next Man script. So, it's just, those are the real differences. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's just sort of odd.
No, it's a great answer. Iron Man, Jerry, you were mentioning earlier, in that it is a different looking movie than your stereotypical comic movie. I mean, comic movies are becoming more and more dark, it seems. And Iron Man, like you said, Jerry, it's a very crisp.
Very crisp, very colorful.
Yeah. What was the back and forth on that creatively about how to craft the image?
Well, I think there wasn't a lot of back and forth. It was, honestly, it developed out of an very instinctual to what my director was like. And John is obviously a performance-oriented guy, being an actor. And I had worked with Robert Downey briefly on Gothica, and I knew what he needed. I had a strong idea of what he needed as an actor, especially him being number 1 on the call sheet. He needed to be somebody who had space, and I needed to give him as much room to create as possible. This being a comic book film, it was, I don't know. It ended up evolving that way. I just felt like it was the right thing to do, and I didn't have a strict language. I had 13 weeks of prep on the movie, and every single day for 13 weeks, I tried to figure out exactly what this film was supposed to be. What's the heart? What's the core? What's the visual language? What's the arc? And the moment I started rolling film, I still didn't know. And it was just because it's not that type of film. it's comic books exist on allegory, and they exist on metaphors, and the psychology of this character. If you went back to the comic books of somebody who goes into a very dark place, this is the origin anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Marvel having its first film come out, I'm sure they wanted it to be a lot lighter, more accessible. You're not going to have a drunk guy running around chasing tail all around the world, and then all of a sudden becoming a superhero.
Even though that is the dream for all of us.
That's what it would be. If it was a different director and they had half the money, somebody would have made that movie.
You're right.
But that wasn't the circumstance here. It was Marvel, wanting to A, honor the character, but B, want to make a lot of money. So for me, it's understanding all those parameters. It goes back to understanding what the structure of everything is, and that was part of it. And I think we were very fortunate to get Robert Downey Jr. And he did half the work. Where as soon as he was cast, half of what I deem as my responsibility in creating atmosphere is gone. I don't need it. He's there.
Yeah.
So it was nice to be able to take a back seat and make sure I supported him and John any way I could, and make sure the camera was free to move and follow, and things were being captured that they were doing, all the subtleties, and try to elevate it beyond being a quote unquote comic book film.
Yeah.
But Batman set the bar. The first Chris Nolan Batman set the bar, and it set the bar for stylistic quality and cinematics, and the second one obviously is phenomenal. And
right.
Iron Man, if we're lucky, we exist on that side of things and not on the other side of things.
Yeah, it's a different creature altogether. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know it's very early in the planning stages. Do you believe that you'll be in on the sequel to it?
I think so. I'm excited about it. After Iron Man did so well, it just felt like why not?
Mm-hmm.
Why not? It's life is short, and let's see if we can make it better and elevate it even more. And I think John did a great job with the film, and the film works. It's a miracle sometimes to me that films work with all the chaos.
It is.
And
chaotic,
that one is
chaotic,
not, I don't regard it as a piece of art. It's something that really worked well. And knowing what I know about John, and the other thing is, I like the opportunity to work with a filmmaker a second or third time.
Mm-hmm.
I love that, actually, because of what you said earlier. It's just, there's a shorthand.
Mm-hmm.
There's an understanding of who you are as a craftsperson. I have an understanding of who they are. And then maybe we can be better the second time, And I think that was the case with every filmmaker I've ever worked with. It was the case with Spike.
Everyone on the show, associated with the show, we all agree. We all think that Iron Man was the most blissful experience of the movies this year. I mean, it was fantastic.
But I also want to add something.
Go ahead.
I just think The Fountain is like one of the. I'm hoping The Fountain is one of these films that's going to be considered a classic down the line, because that's a beautiful film. And I don't know what people say to you about that film, but I personally think that's one of the best films of 2006.
Well, I appreciate that.
It's a beautiful film. And my question, I just want to know, before, I know there's the when you were ready to get to work the first time, is there a big difference between what was originally set to film and when you came back to work on it in the second time? Is there a big difference of the scripts or the stories?
There's a big difference in the content, yeah. I mean, I think the thrust of it, the soul of it, was the same.
Mm-hmm.
But the film was there was a lot going on in terms of action, and there was a lot of popcorn moments in the film. It's a much different film. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't say, to be honest, that it was. Looking back on it now, it's so hard because the film didn't do well and people didn't get it, and people found it esoteric. But the film had a lot of action moments that were stripped down to the movie. And when Darren had the opportunity to make the film at less than half of what he wanted to make it the first time, he stripped all those things out and found the core of the movie, which is this love story that exists in the film. And that existed in the first pass.
Right.
But what's missing is all, literally, Tom traveling through space, going through a neutrino shower. I mean,
right.
Like that, you know, those things are gone. And and you know what? Yeah, I think that it would have attracted another type of, not another type of audience, but it would have probably had another appeal for the film. And yeah, I do think it hurt it not having those things in, but ultimately, it's I think it's a beautiful film, and I've never to this day. I mean, you know, if somebody asked me what film you worked the hardest on, and really that film will stand alone. I thought it was very high in my career as the film that really meant the most to make.
Yeah. I just have two more quick craft questions, and then we'll let you go. I could talk to you all night, believe me. But two phenomenon that are occurring in recent years in the world of films and cinematography. One is the abundance of special effects. I mean, is that a whole new language that you have to learn? How does that affect your work as a cinematographer?
That's interesting because on Iron Man I thought that it was, although at times a little tedious, I thought that they did an amazing job using today's technology to be able to let us make the film naturally. At least in my eyes, we didn't have a lot of. There was some second unit green screen material, but by and large, for first unit, I don't remember bringing a green screen out.
Really?
I never brought a green screen out. I never brought a blue screen out. Everything was done. All the windows even were done with translights and painted backings on all the sets. But that being said, the visual effects people, having ILM and John Nelson do the majority of the work, John Nelson being the supervisor and ILM doing the majority of the work, they honestly gave us a lot of freedom. If it wanted to be a handheld camera, it was a handheld camera. It wasn't a locked-off camera that was going to be made handheld later. If given the choice, if I told them what I wanted to do, they would make it work. So in a way, there's a lot. I think that visual effects has come a long way in the sense that they, because of the stronger tracking software, that they can sit there and they can evaluate. They could, maybe it'll take a little more time to do the shot, but 5-6 years ago, it was no, you can't do it that way. You have to lock it off.
Yeah.
Or no, you can't do it that way. You have to motion control. Well, those days are going away because filmmakers are not attracted to doing that. They'll write this effect out, before they have to sit through an effects-driven film with giant green screen where the actors have to sit there. I mean, that's one type of filmmaker. And then you have Avatar, and then you have some other thing where people are putting stickers on their face and running around like they're making a Nintendo.
I hear your tone when you're talking about that, and I also got it a little earlier when you mentioned digital video.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too.
And obviously, a lot of filmmakers are using it now, and they're predicting that film will be obsolete. I don't know how truthful that is, but tell me your true feelings about the digital video revolution.
I have mixed feelings. I think that it's right now it's in charge of salesmen, which I think is disgusting. I think that the on the upside of it, not to be all negative, is that it, at least in the early days when things like Personal Velocity were made, things in DV, like even Inland Empire, not the early days, but that was just recently. But films were being made on DV as an exploration, even Bamboozled, The Celebration.
Yeah.
These films are all, they're just good films regardless of. Great ideas, good films, regardless of the format.
Yes.
So what I think it does is it takes, at least the smaller formats, the less intense technically. They give people the more of a right to make a film, not a privilege to make a film. You could take it and do whatever you want, make a movie, and cut it on Final Cut, laptop, and why not? That's what it should be. We shouldn't have to wait in a long line. to make what we want to make. It's a creative endeavor, and people who have that, who have the bug or have the talent should be able to do it. But I do think that in the more sophisticated formats, your HD formats, if you look at any website, it's all sales. It's just a bunch of salesmen. And if you really, this whole red phenomenon, why does one want to buy a camera? Is it a sense of ownership? I don't know what it is. Is it a sense of, I'll have this camera and I can make a film? Well, how many films are you going to make? really, if you buy this camera from them. Because what you'll end up doing is you'll sell it, because everybody else, the people who could really afford to buy that camera are the people who could afford to buy the lenses and who can afford to buy the support and ultimately afford to service that camera. That's why they have rental houses. You know what I mean? If you really want to get into that business, make sure you know you're into more money, but they don't ever tell you that. They just want you to, 444. They want you to know that it's the highest resolution, and they sell you these they point toward these websites that have, Peter Jackson shooting a film on the camera, and then they sell who knows how many, I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but who knows what kind of deals Soderbergh got to shoot the Red. You know what I mean?
Right. I'm
not saying he got money, but maybe he didn't pay the making a film is expensive. If you're saying that I could have a free camera package to shoot the movie, or one that's very discounted, let's try it. Why not? Because I could color it digitally later. Which is another thing that bothers me, is that the craft of executing a film is being watered down by the fact that people will capture information as raw as possible and try to color it later. Yeah. And that's where I have a problem, because it's not,
I understand
that's not choice. That's not making choices. That's not being creative. That's not being, it's just not being creative. It's laziness, really. I want to create my film in the company of a couch and a cappuccino machine. And that's not cool.
I completely agree with you. Yeah, that's a beautiful take on that. I was curious about that, because more and more terrific filmmakers. I mean, Michael Mann is an exceptional filmmaker, and he's really bragged about the capabilities of that technology when he's making Collateral. So I know it has benefits if it's in the hands of someone that knows what they're doing, an artist.
Absolutely. I mean, but then you look at Collateral, which looked pretty fantastic, and was able to maximize a lot of the night capabilities that the Viper had to offer in the HD, whatever 900s or whatever they used. I mean, ultimately ENG cameras. It's the same person, same camera they're holding outside a Staples Center after a Laker game, interviewing some guy who's happy that the Lakers won. You know what I mean? It's the same damn camera they're making movies with. But it happens to be extremely sensitive, and it will capture the image at night without having to light a city block. And there are benefits to that. I'll be the first to admit that. But there are ultimately, if it could be a good film on video if it's a good script, but if it's a bad script, it's going to look even worse.
That's it for this episode of our Art of Cinematography series. You can listen in on additional episodes and interviews with many of today's top cinematographers, including Robert Richardson, Vilmos Zsigmond, Alan Davia, Paul Cameron, Jeff Cronenwith, and more by visiting MovieGeeksUnited.net/Art of Cinematography.